said in Matthew 15:18, but the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart. And then Solomon said in Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring, or it is the source of life. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, there's going to be a little pushback here this morning. I already know it. It happens every time I get on this subject. There's always a pushback, and people kind of tune me out or turn me off. But here's what I want to do. Some of you owe me a favor. More than a few of you. And I'm calling in that favor here today. Don't tune me out or turn me off until I get through this whole sermon, because I'm asking that you'd give me a chance, would you, to show you one of the most powerful and one of the most liberating teachings in all the Bible about generosity versus greed. Generosity versus greed. Well, Pastor, I could be more generous, but I'm not greedy. The reason that greed is so difficult to talk about is because greed oftentimes camouflages itself at times as a virtue. People who struggle with greed are known to say things like this: I'm not greedy, I'm just frugal. I'm not greedy, I'm just a saver trying to look out for my family. I'm not greedy, I just want to make sure I have enough so I don't have to be dependent on anybody else when I get to, my retirement years. I'm not greedy, I'm just a good steward. I want to make sure my stuff doesn't get dented, broke, and busted, so I protect my stuff. It's very easy to camouflage greed as a virtue, turning it into something positive. I've never heard anyone just come right out and say, well, my problem is I'm greedy. I've never heard anybody say that. Plus, when we think of greed, we tend to visualize greed in the extreme, like a Scrooge who hoards everything. And by extreme comparison, we'll say to ourselves, I'm no Scrooge, I'm not greedy, okay? What we're going to discover today is that there are different kinds of greed, and when greed gets lodged in your heart, it becomes the filter through which you make all of your financial decisions and your purchasing decisions. But here's the thing. It also impacts your relationships with the people around you. Amen? So we're also going to find out today that greed is not really a financial issue. It's a heart issue. At the heart of the matter is the matter of the heart. Now, I don't believe anyone in this room wants people to think that they're greedy. And if, in fact, you suddenly realized you were greedy, I believe you'd want to do whatever was necessary to rid your heart of greed. Okay? I believe that about our church family. Well, guess what? There's a biblical principle that does exactly that. It shows you how to cleanse greed right on out of your heart. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, darn it, I should have went to the beach today. Don't need this sermon. I hope you're right, but we need to be sure, okay? We need to be sure, because this problem is much more serious than what you realize. I mean, isn't it just as easy to see other people's imperfections as it is for us to miss our own? I can spot your flaws from a mile away, but I can't see the one staring right at me in the mirror. It's easy for me to see your problem, but I can't always see mine. We had a staff member a few years ago, didn't have any children, had grown, in his marriage, had been, for years. 15, 20 years, and they still had no children, but he was a professional at telling everybody else how they should raise theirs. And then God dropped a blessing in their life. And he quit giving out parenting advice. It just, all of a sudden, it went away. It was easy for him to see your problem and how you should be raising your kids, but all of a sudden, God just slapped the taste right out of his mouth. And it was over with, So we miss it in ourselves so often. So before you say this sermon isn't for me, let's take a look at Jesus' definitive statement about greed. This is what he said in Luke 12:15. Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against, help me read it together, all kinds of greed. All kinds of greed. There's more than one kind. Jesus said there's all kinds, right? All kinds of greed. And Jesus is about to describe a specific kind of greed, and I promise you this. This is appropriate for all of us to think about because of the kind of world that we live in. Listen to what Jesus says. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. What Jesus is talking about are people who live their lives as though life is all about the acquisition of stuff. I was watching a little documentary this week, and there's an undiscovered or unconnected or uncontacted tribe in the Brazilian rainforest. And this one particular guy had seen this tribe over and over as he flew around this one particular area, but he couldn't convince, he had never taken these pictures before, he couldn't convince people who were infringing upon this area of the rainforest with development. He couldn't convince them that this tribe actually existed, and he wanted to leave them untouched. And no contact had ever been made with them, and he finally realized that he had to go and do a flyby and take some pictures. So he took a couple of pictures. And ironically, the amazing thing is that until he took these pictures, nobody believed him that they were there. Just a totally untouched area of the Brazilian rainforest. When I was in the Ukraine a few years ago, there was a village that we went to that was so impoverished. And we literally had services in the middle of this village, and I could begin to describe the scene there, and it would break your heart. And I've got pictures, and I should have brought some. I didn't do that today. But I can't get the images out of my mind of the poverty in that little village in the Ukraine, where the children were running around the streets naked with no clothes on, and there was a lot of disruption and a lot of, there was a whole lot of problems in the area. There was no sewage. They just kind of dug a ditch down the main street of town. And it was so poverty-stricken and so sad to watch this that it broke my heart, and I can still see those images and be bothered by them. And I got to thinking, as I was thinking about greed versus generosity today, I was thinking, if a member of that tribe that we showed you a picture of, who's been totally cut off from the outside world, or people from that impoverished Ukrainian village that I visited, were to be able to come and watch the way we live our lives, I wonder what they would think. I wonder what they would think of our society when they saw closets full of clothes that we don't wear, garages full of stuff that we never use, storage buildings to make room for all the extra stuff that we don't want to get rid of, and yet we just keep acquiring more and more and more, yard sales to make 5 cents on the dollar of the original cost. I think people who live in impoverished Ukrainian villages and uncontacted tribes in the Brazilian rainforest would be dumbfounded with all the excess that piles up in our lives. Can we at least agree to that? I think that they would. Jesus says there's a type of greed that we can live our whole life with and be totally unaware of. It's driven by the idea or the assumption that life equals the acquisition of more stuff. Now listen, if you won't admit this about yourself, okay, then at least admit it about the person sitting next to you. Say amen. Let's explore this problem a little bit further. There's a tsunami, or there's a hurricane or an earthquake, and some church or organization sends out a plea. Would you make a $100 donation or a $500 donation? You know what we do? Watch this now, and there's no denying this. This is just who we are. When we're asked to make a donation to a cause through Samaritan's Purse or whatever other charitable organization that we support here at Crosspoint Church, you know what we do? We'll open our checkbook or our pocketbook or our wallet, and we'll go, you know what, I really don't have $500 to give or even $100 to give, but I got $5 extra here. So I'm going to put this extra $5. I got $5 cash. Here you go. God bless you. Now think about this. A whole lot of us, this is going to be painful, okay? I'm just telling you. A whole lot of us in this room will spend 2.5 hours with a car salesman trying to figure out how we can upgrade or sign a new lease or get out of this one to get into that one. We get extraordinarily creative in trying to purchase a new car or jumping through all kinds of hoops trying to cash in on the equity in our homes so we can go out and buy more stuff, because that's the culture in which we live. That's how everything's geared, and that's how it's wired. But if you want a donation, Pastor. If you want a donation, I just looked in my wallet or my purse and I don't have the cash, so I can't make a donation right now. Stop the presses, people. Let's be brutally honest here this morning. We don't let the fact that we don't have cash stop us from upgrading our lifestyle, do we? We find a way. You know what that is? That's living as though the acquisition of things equals life. Jesus said this. He said, be on your guard. This isn't going to be easy. How about an example? Okay, here's a few. Here's just a few. Man, I don't know how I ever survived without my MacBook Pro. I don't know what I'd do if they stopped making iPhones. I'd die to have the new one when it comes out. Jesus just says, hold on, wait a minute. Wait a minute. A man's life doesn't consist in the abundance of his possessions. Wait a minute, Jesus, are you suggesting that I have a problem with greed? I don't have a greed problem. Let me ask you a few more questions. Have you ever hurt people's feelings over your stuff? Are you careful to make sure it doesn't get scratched, dinged, or dented? Listen, for some of us in this room, there are people around you who feel like they're competing with your stuff. Your kids, your husband, your wife, the people you love. It's easy for us to prioritize, and I'm saying us in all this because I have to watch myself, right? It's easy for us to prioritize stuff over the importance of protecting somebody's feelings. God says, hey, I hate to tell you, but that's just old-fashioned, ugly, disgusting greed. Listen, I can't use you as an example because you'll quit coming to church, so I'll use me. It's been several months back. I bought a new F-150, the white one that's wrapped with crosspoint, colors and logos. And we were moving some chairs and stuff. And I had the truck parked out there under the breezeway. And we went through that whole day of moving stuff, and I got home. And the next day, I go out into the yard, and I'm doing something out in the yard, and I walk behind my truck, and there's a big ding in the tailgate. I'm like, oh, sweet Jesus. What knucklehead at that church put a ding in my truck? I was nuts. You hear what I'm saying? I ruined my whole day. It lasted for several days. And then, I do this investigation. I go through the whole process trying to figure out who did it because I was going to clean their clock. And it was like somewhere in the middle of all that, the Lord just calmed me down and said, now what's more important? The people that were trying to help you do ministry or that ding in the back of that truck? Whew, man, you talk about a convicted pastor. I got convicted. Y'all didn't know I go through the same thing you do, right? I mean, it was just tough. It's just something that all of a sudden you begin to prioritize and you begin to realize that things happen. Here's what I want to tell you. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how different our attitude towards spending is compared to our attitude toward giving? In other words, we'll spend money we don't have for things we think we can't live without, but we don't really need. But when somebody asks us to give to a cause, our minds go in a completely different direction, and we look at what we have right now immediately available to make our giving decision. But we don't make spending decisions that way. What is that? Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's a monster called greed. We can't give, but then we turn right around and make irresponsible decisions to spend purely for the sake of me, my lifestyle, what I drive, where I live, where my kids go to school. What is that? Jesus says it's a kind of greed, and it's not a money issue, it's a heart issue. You're thinking about what it would be like to be on the beach right now, aren't you? Yeah, you are. Do you want to know why this message is so vitally needed today and why people hate this kind of preaching so much? It's because we live in a culture that reminds us every day of what we don't have. Of what we don't have, should have, and what we've got to have in our lives. And for most people in this room, if you were honest with yourself, it's out of control in your life. And you'd like to break that cycle, and you'd love to be free. You've tried, but it keeps jumping up, and it keeps biting you on the behind. Man, I really need one of those. Do you really? I mean, do I really? You can't live without it. I don't think that's the case at all. Jesus didn't think so either, so he offered us a way to break this stronghold in our lives, a way to guard your heart from greed. Does anybody want to know what Jesus says you need to do to get off the fast track to greed? No, you really don't want to know, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Let's take a look at what Jesus has to say about it. Matthew 6:19 says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal." Now, he's not saying that you can't have a savings account or a college fund, and he's not encouraging you to be irresponsible in any way. He's simply addressing those of us who keep swapping out the old for the new, and we're on this incessant mission to get more stuff. Store up. Let's focus in on those words that I put in all caps up there. Store up. One of the fastest growing businesses in this country is storage units. Think about this. Just about every road you turn on in this county has a place that rents storage units. If you have a storage unit and you haven't used the stuff in several months, you might have a problem. I'm going to look up there. I'm not even going to make eye contact with nobody. You might have a problem. Because people look away from me when I look at them when I'm preaching like this. Jesus says that if you're stuck in that kind of a life cycle, you need to stop the madness. And do what? Listen to what he says. But store up, there's that little phrase again, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Instead of storing it at Storage King USA, store that stuff up in heaven. How do we do that? We're going to talk about it. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven is Jesus' code phrase for saying that you need to start giving some of that stuff away that it's extra in your life. In this context, that's exactly what he says for the doubters in Luke 12:33. He makes it perfectly clear by saying this: sell your possessions and give to the poor, provide purses for yourself that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. That's his way of saying, I want you to liquidate and reallocate. Quit thinking about how you can acquire more stuff and start thinking about how you can give some of that stuff away that you haven't touched in over a year. Quit storing stuff that you're not using. He says, just stop that. Give some of that stuff away. That's laying up treasures in heaven when you use it for the benefit of the poor in the world. Then he gives us the reasons why. And I've got to tell you that this is so powerful. It's a powerful principle, and if you figure this out, it'll keep your heart free and clear of greed. And I hope that you'll get it. Matthew 6:21, he said, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Here's what he's saying, and here's how this works. This is really awesome, so pay attention. This is the good part, not the uncomfortable part. This is a really good part of the sermon. Jesus says, if you want to find out where your heart is right now, just follow the money trail. Just follow the money trail. Look at your check register. Look at your bank statement, your Visa or your American Express or your MasterCard statement every month. If you want to find out where your heart is, follow the money trail. Jesus said that this is how you know where your heart's desires are right now. Jesus says the reason he wants you to sell some of this stuff and give it away, the reason he wants you to give generously is this: wherever your money goes, your heart will follow. Let me give you a good example. If you buy stock, somebody gives you a tip, says, hey, I heard this company's going to be doing real good, and I know you're in the stock market, you might want to put a little money here. So you invest a couple $1,000s in a stock tip. You know what you're going to do? You're going to check it every day. You're going to start looking at it sometimes twice a day to see where it's at. Why do you do that? Because it took a piece of your heart with it. And you will follow that faithfully. You're going to follow it faithfully, right? Jesus says, okay, since your heart is going to follow your treasure, let's change where you're putting your treasure. Let's give some of it away so that your heart can be fixed on things that have eternal value. Not just the here and now, but the there and then. Let's lay up some treasures in heaven so that your heart will follow your treasure to that wonderful place. Now, God would say to every one of us in this room that he's not interested in your money. He can take your money anytime he wants it. Amen. Here's the thing. Watch this now. He's interested in your heart because he cannot and he will not take your heart unless you give it to him. You've got to give him your heart. He will not take your heart. You've got to give it to him. And since your heart follows your treasure, he knows that you've got to change the place that you're investing your treasure. Now, if you want to get greed out of your heart, then you need to make some decisions. You need to quit the shop until you drop kind of a lifestyle. I got to have it or I'll die kind of thing. And you need to systematically start sending your treasure outside of your kingdom by giving it, not spending it. And in time, your heart will follow your treasure into heaven. And that's what God is most interested in, your heart. Somebody say your heart. Now listen, your money and your possessions have the potential to redirect your heart. A strategic, deliberate generosity is the way to break the power of greed in your heart. Don't you ever forget this. Wherever you send your treasure, your heart will ultimately follow. Matthew 6:22-23. He goes on. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Jesus says, okay, just as your eyes direct your body, you have the potential to use your treasure to direct your heart, because your heart follows your treasure. Now, Jesus uses two words that I've never really preached about, and it just jumped out at me when I was studying, getting ready for this, and his audience probably picked up on it, but in the English Bible, we miss this point most of the time. Let me show you something really amazing. He said in verse 22, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, everybody say good. If your eyes are good. Now, this little Greek word translated good into the English Bible is the only time in the New Testament that this Greek word appears. And outside of biblical literature, it's often translated as generous. So it can mean good or generous. So Jesus is doing a word play here. Essentially, he is saying, if your eyes are generous, your whole body will be full of light. Now listen to verse 23. But if your eyes are bad. Now in Matthew 20, this same Greek word is translated as envious. This word can mean bad or it can mean envious. So Jesus uses a little word play to simply say this. If your eyes are generous, your whole body will be full of light. But if you have envious eyes, I won't, I've got to have, I'll refinance, I'll bargain, I'll do whatever I need to do. If you have envious eyes, your whole body will be full of darkness. In other words, this issue of the heart, this subtle form of greed, has the potential not to simply impact you financially. Watch this now. But it has the potential to impact your whole life. Guess what, people? That's not something new. You already knew this. Many of you are struggling in your marriage because of money issues and money problems. You're thinking, how in the world, think about this, how in the world can pictures of dead presidents impact our love and our romance in this marriage? It's real easy. If you have envious eyes, your whole body will be full of darkness. Every facet of your life will be impacted by the money trail in your life, good or bad, treasures in earth or treasures in heaven. I've never met a truly generous person who wasn't extremely happy. True story. You know why? Jesus said if they have generous eyes, their whole body is going to be full of light. Guess what else? I've never met a greedy, envious person who was truly happy. If you have envious eyes, your whole body is going to be full of darkness. Now, let me say this one more time. This isn't a financial issue. My message today isn't give to this church so the church can do this or we can pay for our building program. I'm not even there. Not even going to talk about that. Jesus said it's not about that. It's about your heart. And you've got to make the tough decision to strategically start sending your treasure in a new direction. Laying up treasures in heaven so that your heart will follow your treasure there, because generosity is what breaks the power of greed in the human heart. Amen. Now some of you are sitting here this morning and you're going, geez, Pastor, my God, why are you talking about this? You realize Jesus is the one that wrote, that said this stuff I'm talking about. Jesus, you know who that is? the Son of God, the one who died on the cross so that we could have eternal life. This is Jesus. I'm just explaining and repeating what Jesus said. So don't get mad at me. Take it up with Jesus. Amen. People tag me in these posts that are real popular on the internet because they don't feel like the church is doing enough, or they don't feel like preachers are preaching the truth. And they'll tag me in these posts and say, what we need is preachers that will stand up for the truth. Guess what? I'm preaching truth this morning. It's not popular truth. So what you mean when you tag me in those little things is I want you to preach the truth as I understand the truth. But if you don't agree with me, preach your own truth, then I just assume you sit down and shut up. That's pretty much what you're saying. If you don't agree with my position on this political issue or on that, then why don't you just be quiet? But if you do, you need to stand up and proclaim the truth. I get so sick of that. Quit tagging me in that garbage. Because we're going to preach the truth. What we need is churches that will stand up and declare the truth. Yes, we do. But we're saying that with a disparity in our minds, that the truth as I understand it, as I believe it. Listen, the truth is the truth whether I agree with it or not, or whether you agree with it or not. We're talking about the words of Jesus today, the Son of God, and it's not comfortable for any of us, okay? It makes us all uncomfortable. I just bought a new truck, so this is a hard sermon for me to preach. But I've got issues too. I mean, we're all trying to get better, right? But geez, Pastor, enough already. I get it. I give up. But what does this mean? Does it mean that I should never buy a new car? Does it mean that I shouldn't build a new house? Does it mean I can't have an iPad or a new MacBook Pro? What does it mean and how does it work? What does a life lived by the words of Jesus on this subject look like? Listen, when this stuff lands where it needs to land, there's nothing to be afraid of here. This is a very liberating principle because it rescues us from the I've got to have it or I'll die type of a lifestyle. So the very practical way to apply this is through percentage prioritized giving. This is how you break the power of greed, and this is how that you keep it under control and how you put a lid on your lifestyle. Percentage prioritized giving. That means you choose to take a percentage of your income, and before you do anything else with it, that's the prioritizing part. Before I upgrade me, I'm going to take a percentage of my income and I'm going to give it outside of my kingdom, and I'm going to put it into God's kingdom where there are heavenly treasures. The first check I write is for the treasures in heaven, period. That should be a non-negotiable. If you want to get off the fast track of spending and onto heaven's highway of giving, if you're tired of your heart chasing after every new gadget that comes out on the market, and you feel like that you'll just die if you don't get one, here's the solution. Percentage prioritized giving. It'll shut greed down in your life because your heart will be chasing after treasures in heaven. Hey, just go ahead and take all the suspicion off the table. I'm going to say something. Don't miss what I'm fixing to say. For those of you who think that I'm trying to pad my pockets or pay for a building program here, forget Cross Point. Don't give your money here. There you go. But I triple dog dare you to give it somewhere. If you don't like what we're doing here, I wouldn't give either. I'd find a ministry, number one, that I could feel good about, and that's the one I'd support. I'm just saying, just do that. Now what's your excuse? We're running out of excuses. You didn't see that coming, did you? Nobody says that. Don't give your money here. Give it somewhere else. But you got to destroy the monster of greed. If you're still sitting there going, I just can't do it. I just can't do that, Pastor. At least now you know why you can't do it. Jesus said, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Generosity breaks the power of greed in the human heart. Now you know about it. It's a problem, and Jesus Christ, the eternal Son of the everlasting Father, says that your whole body will be full of darkness if you don't fix this problem. At least now you know. And the sad thing is this. Your heart will continue to follow your money trail. Your heart's always going to follow the money trail. Every time you waste your money on something stupid, you give another piece of your heart away. When will that end? When will we say enough is enough? We got a lot of problems in the world. And I agree the church needs to stand up. A lot of churches can't. because it costs money to stand up and make a difference. And a lot of people aren't supporting the church these days. They're cutting back on a lot of things, and one of the things that they're doing is they've cut the church out of their giving. It's not a priority, and they think the church is just always going to be there, and churches are closing in this country every single day. When's that going to end? When we say enough? Why not today? Why not now? I've never worried about and I've never missed money that I gave away, ever. I only worry about and lose sleep over the money that I've spent on stuff. You know that's true. You know that's true. Don't give it here if you don't trust us. That's okay. But don't use that as an excuse to not give it all. The average American gives less than 2% of their money away. The sad part is, statistic is the same for Christians. Why not allow generous giving to break the power of greed in your life? Several weeks ago, let's just be real for just a few minutes, okay? Because this is really an uncomfortable sermon, and I've got 7 minutes and 54 seconds. The guys back there put me a clock up there, so I know exactly how much time I've got. I think Micah was behind that. Several weeks ago, God spoke to me clearly. Matter of fact, as Micah was up here preaching in the first service and told me to give some money away. Some of you guys that attend first service, you missed this. It happened in the second service. So in the second service, he showed me where and who to give the money to. And we gave away $2,500 in the second service that morning. So Micah is never allowed to preach in this pulpit again, first of all. What you don't know is the circumstances behind why we gave that money away. Just a real quick rundown, we need $36,000 every month to meet our budget here at Crosspoint Church. During the month of March, for the first time, we didn't even come close. And old worrywart here, I panicked. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? Went into panic mode. Oh Lord, our church is falling apart. We got to start cutting the budget. We got to stop spending. We got to do all this stuff. Work, trim some ministries back, all this kind of stuff. And that morning, while Micah was talking about being generous in his sermon, God spoke to my heart and said, it's not time to be greedy, it's time to be generous. Give. And I said, well, where? And God said, right there. And I said, okay. And that's what we did. And that's what we've always done. When God speaks, we give money away. We give a lot of money away from this church every year. We're giving more money away this year than we've ever given away in the history of our church to needy families, to indigent families, to the impoverished areas of the world. We're trying to make a difference in the world. Crosspoint's going to be known as a church that's making a difference in the lives of people who are hurting. That's what we're all about, folks. Luke 6:38 says, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. Generosity breaks the power of greed in the human heart. I want you to put that slide up that shows the picture of the two wolves. Would you do that for me so I can read that? I got to go over here because I can't see it. I put this on social media this week. It says at the top, an old Cherokee told his grandson, my son, there's a battle between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It's anger, jealousy, resentment, greed, inferiority, lies, and ego. The other is good. It's joy, love, peace, hope, generosity, kindness, and truth. The boy thought about it and asked, Grandfather, which wolf wins? The old man quietly replied, the one you feed. The one you feed. Isn't that true? That's the one that's going to win every time. Here's the thing. Look, I know people always misread it when preachers talk about generosity, and sometimes it's justified. It's not this time. You don't like what we're doing, don't give here. I don't know any other way to say it. But before we go today, we want to give you an opportunity to break the power of greed in your heart today, not by giving to our church, but by opening the door for you to give to another ministry. I want to give you an opportunity to break the power of greed. I'm going to ask my mission team members, those of you that are here today, all those that are fixing to go to the Dominican Republic with me, would you jump up and come stand behind me this morning? All of our mission team members, just come on up. This past week on Wednesday night, and look, here's the thing, this is not a setup. You're going, dadgummit, he set us up. No, I didn't. Because I didn't plan this until actually Wednesday night. This sermon was in the works long before Wednesday night. We're always looking for places that we can invest and be generous. This past Wednesday night, we met with Rob and Tina Ione from the Dominican Republic. His mother passed away in Orlando, Florida recently, so they came back to the States. He called us up and said, hey, I'd love to meet with the team that's coming to the Dominican to help us with our medical missions ministry here, and it's going to be ministering to families and children. Can I meet with you guys on a Wednesday night? And Allison, the one that's coordinating this trip for us, said, sure, we'll work it out. Come on up. So they met with this team on Wednesday night. We're missing a couple, Beth and Casey Robertson and Beth Markham. There's 11 of us that are going to the Dominican Republic. And we're going on a mission. This is not a vacation. It's a mission. We're going to work and to make a difference. And we could do a whole lot more and make a much greater difference and leave a cross-point mark on another part of the world if a few people are inspired to help us out just a little bit. I'm just asking that you be generous. Here's what's going to happen. Not asking for you to give into this church. I'm asking for you to pray about today giving into another ministry. We're going to do at least 2 children's crusades in the Dominican Republic. Our team is already working on skits and activities, kind of like a short-term vacation Bible school to some impoverished children that don't ever get this opportunity unless people from the United States come there to try to help them. So Rob was telling us, as far as preparing for that, maybe you could bring some gift bags. And he said, man, one of the most powerful things you can do is to give a child a Bible here because they don't have money to buy Bibles. So he said, a Spanish Bible, a toy in the bag, the gift bag, a tennis ball or a doll, some miscellaneous items, and we estimated the cost for each one of these bags is going to be somewhere, including the Bible, is going to be somewhere from $7 to $10. So the total cost for about 200 kids that we're going to minister to, we'd love to minister to a lot more. We would love to do a crusade for those children every day that we're there, but you can't do that without the financial support. But the total cost of those bags alone is going to run us about $2,000, okay? So we're trying to get there. Then he told us that they're always short of medical supplies in the medical clinic there. It's this free health care or free care for those people that cannot afford to go to a hospital. Rob and Tina, who I went to high school with, I didn't know Rob in high school. We ran in the same circles, but we didn't actually know each other. And he said that medical supplies are always a necessity there. And so he gave us a list of things, and I kind of roughly estimated that if we could at least meet the list, it's going to cost us about $1,000. And then I pulled Rob off to the side after the meeting. I said, look, our church is generous. True story. We have a very generous congregation. If we just knocked the ball out of the park and we were able to raise in the next 5 weeks, let's say $5,000, what could you do with $5,000 in the Dominican Republic to make a difference for people that are hurting, that need the kind of help that we could bring? He said, he took a step back. He said, Pastor, if you brought $5,000, he said, we could build a house with that in the Dominican Republic. I said, really? He said, we've got a family that's living in such horrible, impoverished conditions that we're trying to minister to. He said, they've had a terrible run of luck. They're living in despicable conditions. He said, yes, sir. He said, I know right where we would plant that seed. We would build a house. Now, I would love to take 11 people to the Dominican Republic and build a house. Wouldn't that be cool? And to say that we made a mark over there and we helped somebody's life that is leaning into faith and trying to make a difference for Jesus. Now, we don't know where that falls or how all that's going to happen or what it's going to look like. But I know this. You guys are just like me. We're all the same here, okay? We will do whatever we have to do. We'll move heaven and earth to get that ATV four-wheeler that I'm going to ride with Ronnie tomorrow at White Lake. Amen. We'll do whatever we can to buy those things that we feel like we can't live without. And then some stupid preacher will get up and preach something like this. And all of a sudden, we put it in perspective and we think about people living in the Brazilian rainforest that have no idea what a car is or what a house for a car is. Not only do they have cars, they have houses for their cars. And they have so much stuff that they have to put their stuff in the houses for their car, and they have to park their car in the driveway. Can't even get their car in the house for the car. That's us. That's our culture. That's the way we live. And I'm just telling you, with the pressure that's on the world today, if we don't turn this around and start becoming more generous people, we do whatever we have to upgrade me. But if we don't start giving money away and taking the extra in our life, God didn't give you the extra in your life for you. He gave it for you to help and bless somebody else. And I preach that every year. And this is a tough one. And this will clean the church out. You know what happens when I preach like this? People quit coming to church. I'm not kidding. This is a true story. They go, well, dadgummit, I didn't think they talked about that at that church. That's why I've been going there. And they quit coming because of a sermon like this. You know what also happens after I preach a sermon like this? Even though people leave and go, well, dang, that ain't the church I thought it was, our generosity, it doesn't go down when those people leave. Our giving goes up every single time. Because greedy people get mad and don't like this kind of preaching. They ain't going to give no matter what you say. So it don't go down. You know who gives and tries to find another way? Generous people. They're going, he's right. I give and I can't outgive God, and I'm going to have a yard sale, not so I can go buy some more stuff, but so that I can give some money to missions and make a difference on the other side of the world. Because God's called us to use our extra to make a difference. So the only thing we're doing here this morning for our board members that may be a little worried I'm going to run people off, we're just keeping us from having to go to a third service anytime soon. It's not going to hurt our giving any. It never does. True story. I hate that, but you know what I've also found? It's just a seed planted, and somewhere down the road, people that aren't generous, they realize it. You know what that preacher said 6 months ago is true. And though I may not like the way he said it, or I may not like the way he talked about it, and I ain't going to go back there because he ticked me off, I do know I need to be more generous. And we're hearing stories and reports of people coming back and saying, hey, you know what? He was right. I've got to start being generous and helping people that need help in the world. Josh and Samantha Hondorp, who go to a church now in Michigan, they got out of the will of God and they moved from here and they went to Michigan and went back home so that they could raise their baby with their family. And he sent me a email not long ago, and he said, Pastor, he said, you're not going to believe what's happened up here. He said, and I'm believing God's going to do this at Crosspoint too. He said, somebody saw a service on the internet, or a daughter that attended their church, and he said the person in Florida, wherever they lived, he said they were so blown away by the ministry strategy and the mission of that church that they called the office. They've never attended their church there where Josh and Sam are going. And they said, how much does this church owe? What's your debt on your property? And it was several hundreds of thousands of dollars. They told them, and in a few days they received a check in the mail to pay off all their debt. Well, this family from Florida, or wherever that they were from, for some reason Florida rings a bell. I'm guessing they probably had a home in Florida. They got interested, started watching and listening to the work that this church was doing. And then they realized that they could do more if they had more to do more with. So they contacted the church again and found out what their vision for the future was. And apparently, and I could be leaving, a few holes in the net here, but the overview of the story is that their vision included a large expansion to house more ministry, to do more stuff in the community. And a few days later, they got a check in the mail for $3 or $4 million. And I hear stuff like that, and immediately my reaction is, oh, God, why don't you do that here? I mean, we got a vision. We're trying to help people. Send us some rich people instead of all these poor people. Right? I mean, that's what. We need some rich people in this church. But you know what's true? Every one of you sitting here today are rich. You are rich. Especially when you look at pictures of uncontacted tribes in the Brazilian rainforests. Did you know that every person in this room falls into the 5% wealthiest people in the world? I preach this to you just about every year. But we don't have a money problem. We have a spending problem. We acknowledge that. But if we would open our hearts and find ways and challenge our lifestyle, we could do more in this church than we've ever done before.